Hey everyone, in this video, I mean, where do I begin? I am honored to sit down one of my favorite comic book writers of all time, the amazing Mark Millar. If you're a comic book fan, you've no doubt heard this name. Let me take a minute to list off some of his comics, not all. I'd be here all day. You may know him as the writer behind stuff so like The Magic Order, Kick-Ass, Jupiter's Legacy, Supercrooks, Kingsman, Nemesis, Old Man Logan, Superman Red Sun, The Ultimates, Huck, Starlight, The Authority, King of Spies, and the upcoming comic Nightclub. I just about managed to catch my breath there. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me, sir. How are you doing today?
Not too bad. I actually feel quite tired when I hear that big lineup of stuff. I mean, I've been working pretty hard.
Yeah, I mean, how do you think I feel? I had to list all that off there, you know? I mean, the two busy men, I assume we're on the same level. But no, I mean, I've tried to put this chat together for so long, and I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to chat with me. I mean, so many different things to jump into, but I mean, first things first, what's the Mark Millar origin story? I mean, I assume you were a comic book fan growing up.
Oh my God. Like, I've been a fan so long that I can't remember not being a fan. You know, the way most people have a memory of being given their first comic, for me, it's all so hazy
Yeah.
because I just always loved it. Like, the way that probably a footballer can't remember not kicking a ball in the back garden, I can't remember not reading comic books. And I actually used to get them before I could even read. So I would just look at the pictures and try and guess the story, which is why for about 2 years I thought Superman and Clark Kent were two different people. And it was only once I was able to read it, I was like, oh my God, you know, which
Like,
is
why is this guy putting on his glasses and taking them off? What does it mean?
somehow I just thought he was one of Superman's friends, like Jimmy Olsen and everything, you know, which shows that disguise is a pretty good disguise, that it works pretty well.
So that you have to make that canon now. I mean, you've confirmed it here. But no, I mean, growing up and being a comic fan, was there more DC and stuff like that that you read growing up, or?
Yeah, it was kind of based on distribution, you know, like,
Yeah.
you know, you'll be a fan of whatever you can get your hands on, right? You know, so like in my little sort of area, the housing estate I grew up in, there was one shop that sold comic books and it was Marvel UK stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So it was a little bit behind. Marvel UK was like black and white reprints of stuff that Americans read a few years before, usually, you know, so
Yes.
and sometimes even a decade before and everything. So you were getting sort of repackaged older comics, which were awesome. But the actual color comics I was getting from maybe a couple of miles from my house, and you know, I think DC was just better distributed. Like every single one of the DC titles was available in maybe 9 or 10 shops in my hometown.
Mm.
You know, so and sometimes they would come in 2 or 3 years late, so you were getting stuff from like, you know,
Yeah.
2 or 3 years earlier. It was amazing, you know. So the DC stuff became a real fanatic thing for me. But all the this is something, Daniel, that I don't know if it was the same, you know, you at school now when everybody's into Marvel, but every single kid in my class was into comics. Everybody.
Really?
And it was just such a glorious period. It was Marvel UK was kind of getting going. The Star Wars movie had come out and there was a Star Wars comic and everything. Superman was coming out and everything. So every kid for about 2 years was into comics. And I thought that's the way the world was. I was like, this is awesome. We all love superheroes, you know.
And you'd be surprised, but no, I mean, that's really interesting because I've heard it 50-50. People would either say growing up everyone loved comics, or growing up I was the only one who liked comics and everyone else hated it. But that's interesting. I mean, as a writer, did you get your start with, was it 2000 AD, or what was the break what was that comic that you remember really putting your name out there? Was it The Ultimates?
Oh no, I mean the one that people actually saw was probably Ultimate X-Men, you know, around about the year 2000, end of 2000. But the one that was the first thing I ever had published is when I was a teenager, when I was 18. So I had a thing called The Saviour out from a British independent company. It actually did quite well. It did pretty good. And yeah, I won a couple of awards and all that. It was really exciting, you know. So, but it took 12 years before anybody really paid much attention to me, you know. But it gave me a kind of kickstart and got me a career that I didn't have to get a real job, which was awesome, you know.
Yeah, not too bad anyway, you know, getting your start. But going into that comic book world, you know, when you're starting out, I assume you don't have these aspirations to work on these, you know, large DC characters. And I mean, I know these Marvel characters, you're someone who has done work with those, you know, stories, but I don't think anyone like says, oh yeah, Mark Millar, he's known for the DC and Marvel stuff. It's the world you've built kind of outside. Was that always the aspiration growing up to build Millarworld, or was that just...
God, no. Actually, it's funny you say that because the aspiration was doing DC and Marvel. Like,
really?
Yeah, 100%. I never ever did my own stuff as a kid. Like, I just wanted to do Superman and Batman. You know, they were like my two favorite things, and I love DC. I mean, I'm a big fan of Marvel as well, but I was a huge fan of DC, and that was the only thing I ever wanted to do. So everything I did to get there was just to write those characters. So I started in British independent comics, then I went into 2000 AD. Then from there went to kind of the sort of quieter side of DC Comics, like the horror line and everything, with the intention of getting in to do Superman and Batman. That was all I ever wanted to do. And then I get poached by Marvel, and then kind of Hollywood happened. But all that stuff was kind of accidental, really. It was like Forrest Gump, you know, just ending up in these situations.
Yeah, do you feel like you're like a product of your environment growing up in Scotland? Did you feel like that informs your writing? Because I mean, I like if you grew up in New York, in Brooklyn, I feel like you'd probably be a different writer. Because I mean,
I'd be terrible.
There's I feel there's a unity between England, you know, Scotland and Ireland. We're all kind of, you know, we know what it's like when it rains, you know. We don't experience that LA sun with the palm trees. But do you feel like growing up in Scotland really informed you as a writer? I mean, even consciously.
Yeah, it's a different perspective, isn't it? You know, like think about Hollywood movies, you know, like when John Woo came in, he brought something fresh in the 90s to action movies. You'd never seen anything like Hard Boiled before. So then he comes in and does Mission Impossible and stuff. It's crazy, you know, and it's really exciting. And we were just another culture that was brought into American comics, like British writers in general. Like when I was 13, Alan Moore was brought in to do Swamp Thing. And Americans had never seen anything like this before. They were like, this guy is amazing, you know? And I love the ideas of looking around the world and people bringing their own accent really to the stuff that the world is so familiar with, right down to Taika Waititi at Marvel, you know, like a guy who's a New Zealand guy from a Maori family and everything doing Marvel characters. It's like, okay, that's going to be different from Stan Lee doing this. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and so did you feel like that informed your work, or was it more subconsciously? It just gave you that kind of atmosphere and it gave you that lens to look at these characters with? Because I mean, we both know, I mean, you know, when you grow up in an area like this, you know, you see these people who they're a part of the culture in a way, you know, they're on the precipice of it all. But it's, you know, do you feel like growing up really did inform your work in a lot of ways that you didn't even realize, or is it always at the front of your mind?
I never think about it because it's just who I am, you know. It's like I'm unaware of having a Scottish accent in the same way you probably don't think about sounding Irish, you know. It's just who you are, isn't it? And that you can't help it when you start typing. Your work has a certain point of view. But I think you must feel this in Ireland too, that we grew up, certainly my generation of guys, grew up loving America. Like Americana was really exciting. Like, see when kids play in Ireland, like see when you were about 7 or 8, you're playing out in the garden with your friends. Did you guys put on American accents when you were playing?
If you were pretending to be Batman, you'd be like, stop it, Robin. You know, you'd put on these, you wouldn't say, what's the story, bro? You know, you put on these voices. I mean, I feel like American culture, especially, and I mean, you talk about the British invasion, that brought that over to America, much like America was bringing itself over to us, you know? I mean, you know, you hear so many stories. Like I've started interviewing directors. I'm sure you know people like Duncan Jones, who's a filmmaker, and, you know, Neil Blomkamp, all these people. They grew up watching like Alien and these American Western films, which were just like, you saw a desert and you'd assume it wasn't real because there were no deserts in, you know, Ireland or Scotland or England. I feel like we all just grew up with that American culture, and I feel like we still do. You know, it hasn't really changed.
But now we see it through the lens of us, and then we reflect that through the rest of the world, which is kind of amazing, isn't it? But I mean, America's century was the century of Hollywood, really, wasn't it? So it was this glamorous idea of America they sold to the world, starting with Westerns, going all the way up to superheroes with crime and all that kind of stuff in the middle. So even gangsters seem glamorous when they've got an American accent. So I always loved America, and I always thought that's where I'll work when I grow up. I just assumed I would move to Gotham City, live in a mansion. You know, that was my plan, to be Bruce Wayne.
That's the dream, and you know, it seems to have paid off enough for you. But no, what would you think was that comic that really introduced you to American audience? Because we talk about you being inspired. I mean, The Ultimates, I know that was one of the biggest comics of this time. I mean, I've heard from so many creators that talk about The Ultimates. It seems like a myth to me. But would you kind of say that was the comic which, I don't know, because I mean, for Garth Dennis, we were talking, and he says he feels like for him it's Preacher. Preacher put him on the map. For you, would it be Ultimates?
Actually, you know, there's a couple before that. What happened was I was kind of slogging around for over a decade, right? And I was always kind of making a living. I was doing okay, you know, but never really quite been noticed, you know. So I would say like almost nobody can name anything I did in that first decade. But then I did a book called The Authority, which I took over from Warren Ellis and Brian Hitch. And Frank Quitely and I teamed up and we did The Authority, and it was like really big, and everybody loved the first story arc. It kind of went everywhere, and people were doing parodies of it online and things, and we were like, okay, this is interesting, you know, and sales were going up on a book that was already hot. So we thought this is cool. So Marvel came in. DC had made us an offer actually to come on staff. It was quite odd, and to move out to the States, and Marvel on the way back from the States. Frank Whiteley and I were on a week-long bender out in San Diego, you know, on DC's dime. And then on the way home, Marvel said, "Hey, do you want to drop in and have a cup of tea with us?" kind of thing. And we were like, okay. And it was a trap. And they made a bigger offer, you know, and they got us, and they got Frank Whiteley on New X-Men, and they got me on Ultimate X-Men. So Ultimate X-Men was probably my big, real sort of mainstream break.
Yeah,
Reimagining of the X-Men, really, for a modern audience. And it went straight in #1 in the charts, and sort of kind of stayed there. So like then I was able to do the Ultimates on the back of the success of that. So it was kind of probably all three of those things. The Ultimates is certainly the one that had the most significant impact on culture, you know, through what it did at Marvel and everything, you know. So, but all three, that I could just suddenly I was able to pay my phone bill. It was actually amazing. It was a good time.
That's the goal anyway, you know. No, but that's really fascinating, that point of, you know, kind of making that adjustment. Like when I chatted with Frank, obviously we talked about the authority, and he talked about how it was very unbridled in a way. It's like, it's not something like, you know, you're not writing Iron Man, Captain America, like, you know, you're writing these characters who just aren't as big, so there's obviously a bit more wiggle room. And when you're doing something like the Ultimates, I mean, I assume these characters were obviously still large, maybe not as large as they were now, but they were still these huge blockbuster characters. So was there ever a pressure when you're coming on to work on these priests? Because if you've been dreaming about it all your life, once you're handed it, you're like, oh well, I mean,
it's like you're suddenly behind the wheel of the family car, you know, to do something like Superman or X-Men or something like that. I think it helped that Marvel was in a real low point at the time, sales-wise. Like they were in real trouble, and like they were filing for Chapter 11 the year before, going bankrupt and everything, you know. So I think they thought, well, let these idiots do anything they want, you know. This doesn't really matter, you know. So it was one last roll of the dice. So that was quite nice. I think the real pressure comes when everything's just going great, you know, and you have to try and maintain it being great. Actually, when there's nothing to lose, it's quite a cool time, because they let creative people get away with being creative, you know. But so I'll give you an example. I think Marvel's share price was something like $1.80 at the time, and then a couple of years later, a few years later, it was at $56. Right. So when the share price is 180, they don't really care, you know. But when it's $56, they care, you know. And everybody in the world was suddenly watching Marvel a few years later. So I think it became not the sort of place a guy like me really works, you know. I kind of like doing troublemaking stuff. So by 2009 and Disney coming in, I was like, oh, maybe this is the time to go. You know?
Was this kind of when Blade came out? Because I got to chat with David Goyer, and for anyone who doesn't know, that the screenwriter who kind of wrote Blade. So was this kind of that period where Marvel were, I mean, we've heard, you know, tales about where things are like, they definitely weren't the entertainment, you know, machine they were now.
It's crazy. They literally had no money to give you a coffee if you went to the office in 1999. I mean, Marvel was in a bad way. And David Goyer, I think, is the unsung hero of this whole superhero generation that we've got. Because like David did Blade in 1998, and he'd also heroically been trying to get all these things off the ground for years, you know, like Deadpool, and he got the Nick Fury thing going. You know, when people had no interest in Marvel characters at all, you know, he was getting this stuff going. And Blade is awesome. I mean, I love the first Blade, and the second Blade's amazing, and I really like the third Blade too. I mean, Ryan Reynolds is fantastic in it. So I think, I mean, it's got its flaws, but it's a really fun movie. But I think Goyer, you know, he did Batman and all this kind of stuff. You know, I think he's the guy that nobody gives the credit to, but who deserves the credit, I think, for these past 22 years that we've had. And yeah, Blade is what kicked this all off.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like obviously the Ultimates did play a part in that, when you were allowed to kind of be free. I mean, this is something, let me just, you know, bring this to you. This is something I've kind of noticed about your work. You're free to disagree. I feel like you as a writer, and you look at your work, you look at your superhero original work, Jupiter's Legacy, Nemesis, Huck, Starlight. I feel like you can come into a world and see what it's been missing. You can bring something new into it. I mean, you know, the Avengers were obviously that kind of blend of mythology, superheroes, the real world. I feel like the Ultimates was the exact same. It was a period of its time. You looked at the world you were living in, you put it into your work. I mean, something like Nemesis, I feel, is the same. You're looking at the world around you, and you can bring something, you can bring an edge that's not really seen in superhero comics. And like, you can do that in like Marvel and DC, and you can also do that in your own work. Would you feel like that's fair of me to say?
I think what I'll probably do is I try and update the mythology with a new twist, right? So if you think about it, I mean, you can draw a straight line through these characters that we all love right now and go back to ancient Greece, you know, and beyond. You can go into Sumerian legends, right? I mean, these stories go back a long way. And what each generation does is it adds another couple of baubles on it, you know, and kind of makes it something appropriate for that generation. So for example, Superman, you can obviously trace all the way back to Samson and Hercules and all these ancient characters.
Yeah.
But more modern times, you know, you've got Gladiator, this pulp novel from the 1930s. It was a huge influence on Superman. Doc Savage, which is a big influence. His name was even Clark Savage, and he had a Fortress of Solitude, you know. So like, so you see that Superman is part of this tremendous legacy. And what I like to do is maybe play around with that and think, okay, well, we're now in a new century, but in the 21st century, what would that be? You know, so I'll look at Superman and try and deconstruct it and think of other characters in there that you can get out of this, you know. So instead of it being, you know, I never think of it like a, you know, a swipe or a copy or anything like that. I always think, you know, what can I do to add to the myth, you know, that then takes that archetype forward. Batman goes all the way back to the Shadow and Sherlock Holmes and everything, and there'll be a post-Batman kind of character as well, you know, which I'm always trying to think about, like, what's the post-Batman hero?
Yeah. Let me ask you something like this. I mean, we've all read Watchmen. We know that Watchmen is superhero satire. It's a deconstruction of the very concept of superheroes. Is Kick-Ass in the same vein as that? And I mean, Nemesis, would you describe it as superhero satire or superhero, or are these just genuine? So like Huck, I feel, is an amazingly optimistic. And then Nemesis, on the other hand, is not as optimistic. You know, would you describe your work as superhero deconstruction or just superhero stories, if that makes any sense?
I think superhero stories, you know, I think like, if you deconstruct, you're left with nothing. You know, if you keep deconstructing, you're left with nothing. So I think you just got to just play around and have a good time and do the story you want to tell. So I love that the most sort of youth-orientated thing I ever did was a thing called Superman Adventures, which I did the year before The Authority, which was the most outrageous thing I've ever done, you know? And it was quite nice just to stretch different muscles. You actually kind of thought, well, okay, I've done that for 19 months. Now it's going to be cool to do this for 12, you know, so I'll do something totally different. And I try and do that now even with the Millarworld stuff. So Huck has got a really different vibe from Nemesis, but I do love them both, you know, and they both have merit, and I get something out of each one because they're both kind of me. So in the same way that I can love super dark humor like Curb Your Enthusiasm or something like that, but at the same time sit and watch The Incredibles and laugh at the scenes in The Incredibles too. You know?
Yeah, I feel like there's a great like expandableness you have as a writer. You can do these different words, and like you could read two comics and you wouldn't even know they're by the same type of author. I mean, that's really
my dream. I love the idea of that. Actually, I'd love it if people don't realize.
Yeah,
you know, because you've tried something so new they don't even know it's yours. That's the dream. You know?
Yeah, and amazing. And so some I'd love to talk about. Let's talk Millarworld. Your very own corporation, and like what I love you've been doing. You're just bringing your comic books to life in a way that I don't think has been done before. We've never seen, you know, someone who's done the comics also move into that world. And I know you're producing a lot of this stuff. I mean, what's it been like for anyone who doesn't know? Millarworld is basically you made a deal with Netflix. Can you explain what Millarworld is for anyone who's not aware?
A lot of people are quite confused by what we did. What we did was so radical that nobody quite understands what we did, right? So. Loads of people will have a first look deal with a studio or something like that, you know, where you kind of take your stuff to them first before you take it out to other studios. Or you maybe have a 3-year deal or something where your stuff, you know, is exclusive to that studio. But what we did is we sold the studio, you know, we sold Millarworld to Netflix in the same way that Marvel got sold to Disney. And Warner Brothers bought DC. So it's only ever really been done twice before, you know. So we had a production entity that is now completely owned by Netflix. So if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, it'll make no difference, and it just continues on. These are Netflix productions, you know. So what's very unusual though is what makes it even weirder is it's kind of they then offered me a separate deal where they said we'd like you to come on staff and be president of Millarworld within Netflix because we like what you've been doing with Kick-Ass, Kingsman, Wanted and all this. Just, we feel you know the material better than anyone, so you come in-house, you know? And so it's quite exciting, you know, sort of being on the other side because what usually happens is you don't even get to write the screenplay generally, you know, it's very rare. Peter Benchley, Mario Puzo, you know, these guys are the absolute exceptions. Usually you're kept as far away from the production as possible and you show up at the premiere. You do a set visit and you show up at the premiere, you know? But I think the only way I wasn't super involved with Jupiter's Legacy, you know, I think towards the end I was because it wasn't going well, but like, but since then I've been involved in everything obsessively. So, you know, so half of my day is actually just spent poring over other people's scripts, you know, and the other day I'm writing new stuff. So I signed a deal where I have to produce a certain amount of stuff every year where I have to do the sequels to the books that they bought, the franchises that they bought, and create a certain amount of new franchises in-house every year as well. So I've created Magic Order, Prodigy, those kind of things. Anything post 2018, I've created in-house at Netflix. They own it, but I created it in there, you know.
Yeah, totally. Let me ask you this. What's it been like seeing your work morph? Because it's really interesting. We've had the Kingsman adaptation, the Kick-Ass, the Wanted. These were all live action Mark Millar adaptations. But then you see, you know, American Jesus, it's being turned. Is it Spanish?
It's about 80% Spanish. And it's interesting, actually, because I was watching this morning, I was watching a new cut of episode 2. And what they have to do is when they send me a cut as a producer, I have to approve the cut or then send notes back and everything. But I don't speak Spanish, right? So they have to translate it every time they send me a cut. And then I have to send my English notes that then get translated into Spanish for the Mexican team, you know?
Someone shows up at your house speaking Spanish, just reading it out to you. I assume that's the glamour of Hollywood.
All I can say is like 2 beers, please. I can say dos. I can't even remember the word for beer now. Is it?
Wow, that just shows.
Dos por favor, and then point at the beer.
A great producer. I mean, and then seeing Supercrooks as an anime, which is like the most out there. Like you wouldn't even think of it. What's it been like seeing your work morph through those different forms, whether it be? And have you noticed for some of your books, do you ever look at a book and say, I feel like this would be better as a film, or we should go for a TV show for this? Like Kick-Ass, I feel that's a film, you know. And then some of your other works, I feel you could definitely do as a TV show. So what's that been like?
It's interesting because sometimes you start it and then you think, oh no, this isn't a movie, this is a TV show, or vice versa, you know. So like Huck, for example, you know, we started the movie and it's morphed into a television show because we realized, no, actually, you know what would be really cool is an episodic thing with this. It actually works so much better, and it makes it different from other superhero stuff as well. So it was actually one of the other executives said, this would be a great show, and we were like, you're absolutely right, you know. So that's kind of what happens. And you know, but rarely though, you know, I think most things like X-Men is a great movie and could also be a great television show. Spider-Man, you could have really brilliant, it'd be super expensive, but a really brilliant episodic Spider-Man TV show. So if you've got good people, you can sort of do it in any format. But some things, you're right, some things do lend themselves slightly better. A Game of Thrones movie would have been terrible, wouldn't it? You know,
100%.
We needed 60 hours. We needed 60 hours.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's any of your works, like do you have a Watchmen? Do you have a book that you feel is unadaptable? Or is there like, can you do something with all of them?
No, I think quite filmically anyway, you know. So like I mean, I think the way I structure in my head, the way that some artists are photographic realists, you know, like Alex Ross can't help draw like a person. I can't help write something people understand. It's just kind of like weirdly, it's just what I'm into. Like I really like something with a beginning, a middle, and an end, you know. So Hollywood guys are like, I get it, I understand it, I want to make that into a movie, you know.
Dude, yeah. And let me ask you this, you know, when you started Millarworld, did you even expect this? Because I mean, before Millarworld, where you were obviously a big name at Marvel and DC, I assume you've done a lot of the big books. I feel like you could have easily have. I mean, was it true there was kind of an offer? They were like, you can stay at Marvel, we'll pay you, or you can go start your own company. Is that kind of how it shook out?
Yeah. What happened was Stan Lee said to me, I was talking to Stan Lee in early 2003 or so thereabouts, and on the phone, and Stan said to me, you should 100% go and create your own characters. And I was like, I don't want to do my own characters. I like the Marvel characters. I'm really having a good time, and I'm doing the Ultimates and Ultimate X-Men. I'm going to start doing Wolverine and Spider-Man soon. I can't wait. And he was like, just trust me, you've got it in you to do this. And I was like, I've literally, even as a child, I've never done this. He says, just try it. And the first thing I went off and I did, I remember writing it on a train in Glasgow. And it was Wanted. I sat and wrote out the plan for Wanted. And then I set it up as an independent comic, and I thought, well, we'll see what happens. And before the book even came out, it had been bought as a film, and Angelina Jolie's attached and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, that was really easy. You know, it was like, you know, who knew that Stan was right? You know, it's like, then I thought I'm going to do it again. You know, I had a contract at Marvel that I had to fulfill a certain amount of books every month, so I couldn't actually do much with Millarworld stuff. I did American Jesus and, you know, a couple other books, but I didn't have time. I actually didn't have time to go and do this stuff, so because I was so busy at Marvel. And then the Wanted movie was getting made, the Kick-Ass movie was getting made, and Marvel said to me, right, time to renegotiate your contract. We'd like to pay you $1 million here to come and you know, sign up again. and they actually held a check up, you know, like over the phone. They said, "We've got a check in my hands."
Like a cartoon. They had this check that size.
And they said, we're going to send you this check now before you've even written anything. You can have a check for $1 million. And I was like, oh my God, you know. And I said, I'm going to actually turn this down. I'm going to go and I'm going to focus on Millarworld. And they were like, really? You know, because it's a bit of a gamble. And I was like, well, you know, I've done 2 things that have become movies already. You know, we're about to start production on, I think we actually started production on Kick-Ass. And I was like, I feel pretty good about this, you know. Yeah. And they were like, okay, you know, so be it, you know. And I left on great terms, but it was a bit weird turning down $1 million, you know. Like it's a fair whack of cash.
I know. I mean, I understand. You know, that's just.
But it was the best thing I ever did, obviously, you know. I mean, because it meant I could go and build the Millarworld library, and we made loads more stuff. And it's, you know, I mean, I love the Marvel characters, but that felt like the graduation for me, you know, to go off and do this instead.
Yeah, and I feel like there's no waning in quality. You're like, for the stuff you've put up, like I've never had to research so hard for an interview, because it's like there's always, like, you know, that introduction of all of his comics made Mark tired, but still there's obviously that heart to each and every story. I mean, you know, let me, you may get a kick out of this, but for Christmas 2019, this was actually almost, this was a few years back, and just to prove how much of a fan I was of your work, I wrote a list, like my Christmas list, and it was just comic books, and I said, I want a signed Mark Millar comic. And I was like, anything like that. So I have a Wolverine issue 1. It was Enemy of the State.
All right.
Signed upstairs in my room. So that shows I'm a true Mark Millar fan.
How did you get it?
Was Santa.
Yeah,
you know, my parents from eBay anyway. But you know, it's one of my prized possessions. So I mean, if you ever come to Dublin, I mean, you did a signing in Dublin like 3 years back, didn't you?
I think it might have been about 2016 or thereabouts or something, 2016, 2017. One of my pals has got a comic shop there, you know, Big Bang Comics.
Bang, yeah, I know the lads who run it. It's like 20 minutes from my house. It breaks my heart.
Well, next time I'm there, come along. Those guys are great guys, you know. I'm a big fan of the Hendrick brothers, you know.
Oh, dude, we have to have you back over. That way I can, that just shows I'm an ultimate Mark Millar fan. I got a comic all the way back in 2019. But no, that's just a little side. I tell you, I appreciate that. Let me tell you this. When do you notice like a difference between your work? Is it hard for you to get into something like Nemesis, which is like, what I love about Nemesis is that you just don't hold back. It's like, it's a comic about a bad guy, and like, you know, you see something like the Suicide Squad, which are comics like bad guys. There's obviously that heart. You built them up, so you kind of like them. But Nemesis, you're like, oh, I hate this. Like, he's just like, there's nothing redeeming about him at all. Is it different doing something like Nemesis as opposed to Huck, which is obviously a lot more optimistic? And you have to, is it in your mindset? You have to change it when you're going from book to book?
Oh, completely, yeah. But I mean, it's all different aspects of your own personality, of course, you know. So like the way sometimes it's awesome to watch a Korean movie that's the most crazy thing you've ever seen in your life. But then the other thing, you know, sometimes it's lovely to watch an old 1950s Doris Day film or something, you know, like, you know, everybody has an eclectic mix of tastes. And it's the same when you're writing something too. Sometimes it's just so fun to do something like Nemesis and just cut loose, think of the worst things you can possibly think of and just put it down on the page. And I love to follow a really soft project with a really hard project like that, just because it balances your day out a little more. Yeah. And you look forward to it. If you do the same thing all the time, you would be so bored, you know. I mean, it's great getting to do loads of different things.
Dude, is Nemesis coming back? I mean, I know you can't talk about that too much, but can you tell us the release date for this relaunch?
I've got the first issue right now in the house, the black and whites of it, you know. So Jorge Jimenez is drawing it, who's like, he's the best artist DC's got. I actually did a real smash and grab a couple of months ago. I went into Marvel and I stole their biggest artist. Then I went into DC and stole their biggest artist. So I'm doing a big Millarworld crossover series that crosses over all 23 franchises into one big story, you know. So it's a crossover with everybody. It's got Starlight, Jupiter's Legacy, Magic Order, everything all in one thing, Huck, you know, all together. And it's worked out really well. I'm really happy with it.
Is this big game?
Was it big game? Yeah.
I mean, I know. Let me just. We can't talk about it too much, but Pepe Larraz, who I think I don't know if he's still doing X-Men.
He's actually just finished issue 3. He's just starting issue 4 right now. Yeah.
And big game. Would you describe that as the Mark Millar magnum opus?
Yes. Oh, this is my Crisis on Infinite Earth, Secret Wars, Civil War. This is my own Millarworld Civil War. It's like everything all in one big story. So I'm really excited about it. I mean, it's going to be mega. Like, even just having Pepe drawing it, this is going to be huge, you know. But before that, in January, there is Nemesis Reloaded, which is my big Nemesis thing, and it's Jorge drawing it. it's spectacular. I'm so happy with it, you know. So we've actually got, there's some stuff we won't be announcing for a few more weeks, but the first half of next year, there's so many great artists. We've got Olivier Coipel back for our project. Frank Quitely's already drawn his project because I've been stockpiling. And a guy, are you familiar with an artist called Travis Charest?
Yeah, I'm aware of his work, yeah.
Now, because of your age, like, and Travis is slow, you know, it's been a while since Travis has had something out, but I think he's regarded by almost everyone like my age as like the greatest comic book artist who's alive right now, right?
Wow, high praise.
He's amazing, right? And he's so good that, you know, he takes sometimes a month a page and everything, you know. So I mean, it's like I think in the last 15 years, the only thing I've seen from him is 2/3 of a French graphic novel, you know, so maybe about 60 pages, and that's all I've seen in like 15 years. So I said to him, let's do a project together, but I want to give you like a 4-year head start on this thing, you know. And he's done it. He's actually just 2 pages away from finishing it, and we're going to release some pages in a few weeks' time. So Frank Quitely, Olivier Coipel, Travis Charest, I mean, there's a good 2023 coming if you're into our books.
Yeah, you're doing something with Quitely, right? I mean, I was talking with Frank. I mean, this was a few months back, and he said, and I have a new project, I can't talk about it. And the second we finished filming, I was like, oh, so is it with Mark? And he was like, yeah, it's with Mark. And I was like, I knew it, right? Like, I could just tell the way he was talking about it. I was like, the second I finished it, and he just kind of gave me a slide, and I was like, yeah, it's with Mark. But yeah, that's amazing. I mean, we're approaching our last 10 minutes. Let me ask you, a few wrap-up questions. Seeing your work adapted, what's that feeling like, seeing these things that kind of came from your head onto a comic book page, then being up on the big screen? Have you kind of gotten used to it, or is it still just a mystical thing?
You never get used to it. I mean, you know, what was amazing actually was the first time it happened was Wanted. And I flew to Prague where they were filming up most of Wanted. And I went out into the countryside, and there was 300 people all standing with little baseball caps on that said Wanted. Right? And I remember it being in a little drawing pad in Glasgow on the train when I was sitting writing that out, you know. And it said Wanted, but here it was on everybody's baseball caps and crew shirts and things, you know. And then I saw a big giant train track that was a fake train track with a real train that had been put on top of it, and they could go backwards and forwards for like 3 miles, this train, and they were using it for an action scene that was being shot. And I was like, this has all been done for my wee notepad thing, you know. This started as a wee notepad, and there's Angelina Jolie over there, and there's a big train, and it's like, this is insane, you know. And actually, it's quite overwhelming. It's a bit like something escaping from your head. It's like, this is crazy. And you're walking around in something that used to be inside you. You know, you're actually inside it. And you know, you're inside the house or the room or whatever of the character you created. You see his clothes hanging up in a wardrobe for a scene and everything. It's cool. And then even cooler actually is when it's superheroes, like the walking around the Jupiter's Legacy set and seeing the big Hall of Justice kind of thing, you know, the big table with the chairs and the statues of the characters. You're like, this is like being inside a comic book panel. This is really cool. So, I mean, I think if you ever start taking that for granted, you've lost your mind. You know, it's totally. It's too cool.
I totally. And another last question I'd love to ask you is, when you're doing this work, and I mean, you have injected realism. We've talked about that at the start. Like, I mean, I read this really amazing article on Following the Nerd by some jackass called Andy McCarroll. And it was like, it detailed you as a writer. And it was like, he could have done this big romanticized, he could have made these superheroes like, oh, bright and shining. But instead, he was like, he really explored that moral dichotomy, which is attested to them. He made them real people. He brought them down to our level in the real world. When you're doing these stories, and I mean, in Jupiter's Legacy, you deal with the Vietnam War. You ask those questions of, well, hey, if I can leap buildings in a single bound, if I can catch a speeding bullet, is it not my moral duty to go to Vietnam and stop the killing? You know, you can deal with those questions. Do you feel like that's easier to digest than something like superheroes and sci-fi? Like an example of that, I'm not sure if you've seen District 9 by Neil Blomkamp.
Neil Blomkamp.
I got to interview Neil, and we were talking about it, and he kind of said it's a film about segregation and racism, but it's a sci-fi film. So you can get that message across, and people, because if it was just a film about segregation, people would kind of be like, oh, I don't know if I want to watch that. But do you feel like work's kind of easier to digest that way?
I think they're both valid. You know, like, I think there's some characters you do it with and some you don't. So for example, Jupiter's Legacy, when it's a finite story, the idea of it is, why are these guys catching bank robbers when they could be taking food over to people starving in other countries, or, like you say, stopping torture in the world and everything? So you flip it and you bring the superheroes down to our level. But then at the same time, if you write Superman, you can't do that. If you write Superman, you have to go into his world and actually make that type of story work, because somebody said, I think it was Superman 4 was the movie where Superman was stopping nuclear war, and he was gathering up all the world's missiles and firing them off into the sun. And the man who wrote Superman the movie said to Christopher Reeve, "You can't do this, because then where do you go with your next film? You know, like as soon as Superman starts solving the world's problems, he's no longer a guy that can run and run as a series of adventures. You know, you have to have the disbelief in there. So it has to take place in Superman's world, which is a bit more innocent and naive. You can't bring him to our world. So I think both are equally valid, though. I mean, I would hate it if all Superman stories were about solving real world problems, you know?
Yeah.
But it works for Jupiter's Legacy because that's an extrapolation of the Superman mythos, you know, for the real world. But it does make it quite digestible for adults, though. Like, adults have got a little hook and a little way into the story with something they understand as a high concept. But kids want to see you having fun in Superman's world, I think.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like you'd understand that as a writer. That's why I wanted to ask. But that's, I mean, I feel like that's obviously that's such an element of it. Like, I have our print up here of Superman, because it's like, that's Superman. He's picking up a car with a smile on his face. Yeah. You can't really make him grimy or gritty. I mean, you can, but it's like,
yeah, it's not Superman though. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't work for the character. Like, I mean, Kingdom Come by Mark Waid, I feel like that's as dark as I feel you can take Superman in a way.
He doesn't go dark. I mean, Superman actually is a constant in that story. Like,
yeah.
The world around him is dark, but he's a reliable piece of light in that world. Like, at the end of the first issue, where he rescues those people, where you think there's no hope, and then Superman shows up and rescues everyone, you're like, this is awesome, Superman's back. So he never changes, and that's what makes Kingdom Come so great. I mean, I'd say Kingdom Come's maybe my favorite ever Superman story. I love it.
Oh, really? Let me ask you this. If you could see any of your work adapted tomorrow, whether it be a feature or TV show, which work is it?
We're kind of doing them all, you know.
Yeah. There you go. That's your answer. So another question. Let me ask you this: what do you feel is the ultimate Mark Millar comic? I have an answer for this, I think. But what do you feel if you had to give someone one comic? Is there one, or are they all equal? If you had to say someone, here is the ultimate comic, if you want to know who I am as a writer, is there one?
You know, that's a great question, because I do get a lot of kind of like new friends in my life over the years, you know, who say, "Oh, give me one of your books." And you want to kind of think, well, okay, I want them to be impressed by what they read. I want it to be one that's a good one, and a good one for somebody who hasn't read comics to understand as well. And what's quite interesting is it does change. I used to give people Kick-Ass 1 a lot. Magic Order is the one I give everybody just now, actually. You know, like, Magic Order, I always hand that out. People seem to like Huck. I think Magic Order, though, like when I give people Starlight, actually. Like, that one goes down a bomb.
That's my one. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, and that's kind of, it's everything I'm interested in as well. You know, it pushes a lot of my buttons, that story. But Magic Order and Starlight are probably the two to my normie friends. You know, when I say, look, this is what I do as a job, and then they read it and they're like, oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah. I feel like Starlight is very, I mean, it's like the films that a lot, like directors, I feel whenever I talk to them, they say, oh yeah, my favorite film growing up was Indiana Jones and Jaws. And I feel like that film's lost, because now I feel like so many directors, this just from chatting with them, and there's nothing wrong with it, but there's such a kind of need to preserve their image. And it's like, I feel like they want to make, like, you can make a French film about grief. You can do that. No one wants to make a 2.5 hour film, you know, about someone who wears his underwear on the outside, because I feel like that there's such an element of that. But I feel like Starlight, if it was turned into a film, would be like, I mean, that's like a Star Wars for a new generation. I feel like that'd be really.
We're doing Starlight now.
Yeah, really? Is that still kind of Is that?
Yeah, because Starlight was the rights got bought before I sold to Netflix by what was then 20th Century Fox, now 20th Century Pictures, and like Joe Cornish got hired maybe 10 months ago, 11 months ago, to write the screenplay. You know Joe Cornish, who did the Law, and he's fantastic, you know. So Joe has done the most perfect screenplay. I was actually talking to him this morning. He's doing one more tweak, but he's fantastic. He's done the best screenplay, and we're already talking cast and everything. We want to get that going as soon as, you know. I mean, that won't be at Netflix, but I'll still be an exec producer on it, you know.
Oh, that's amazing, Mark.
It'll probably be the next of our films, I think. You know, but I mean, obviously these things take 1.5 years or whatever you know to do. But I suspect that'd be the next one out. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I mean, Mark, I can't thank you enough for chatting with me. My last couple of questions before I let you go. What advice would you have for anyone looking to become a comic book writer?
To work in comic books, number one, do it because it's the best job in the world. It's really, really, really fun. And it's funny, you do see people moaning and you see all the kind of culture wars going on with comics and everything, you know. Just ignore it all, you know, and just enjoy it. Remember, like those posters you've got in your wall behind you, just think how much fun those books are, you know. And the people you meet in comics are always great, you know. Like you can count on 2 fingers the people you're not going to get on with, you know. It's like comic people are all kind of like a big family, you know. Everybody kind of knows each other pretty fast, and everybody's a good laugh and all that, you know. It's nice. It's much better than a normal job, you know. Like, get a chance to work in comics, do it. And I would say one thing that's really amazing now compared to when I was growing up was I used to always think, how am I going to get my break? How are people going to see my stuff? Because if I self-publish something, it costs quite a lot of money to print up something. Even once I've done the work, it costs a lot of money to print it up. And now you can just stick it up online. You know, so if something's good, it'll start getting shared by people and you'll be noticed by lunchtime. You know, so I say to everyone, get your stuff done, get it up online, and the work will flow if the work is good enough.
Oh, definitely, Mark. I can't thank you enough for chatting me. Like when I watched your interviews, you strike me as someone who just has such an obvious passion and enthusiasm for comics. I mean, that's like one of the reasons I started this channel, because I feel like comics just shouldn't be a negative place. I mean, obviously, I'm going to sit here sound like a little jackass saying, oh, well, I mean, you know, but like comics shouldn't be something like, you know, I feel like that passion and that love, it's automatically a great thing. So when there's people like you creators who are obviously just so passionate about it, it's really amazing to see. So thank you so much for chatting me.
Is it something you want to do when you're older?
Man, that's the dream. Totally. Let me ask you this. Are you on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter for anyone watching?
Yes, Twitter is Mr. Mark Millar. But it's kind of, to be honest, this is a terrible thing to admit, but Netflix's marketing department, I handed it over to them about a year ago or something, and they do my tweets for me, you know. But I do have a little look now and then. I do pop my head in now and then, and they also do the Facebook and the Instagram page as well. I don't even know how to work in. I don't have a mobile phone, so I can't go onto Instagram. But but I do 100%. That is me occasionally on Twitter.
Back in 2019, I sent Millarworld, the Facebook page, a message trying to reach you. So that just shows never give up. Almost 4 years, and I did get the chance to chat with you. Any books you can promote? One thing we didn't get to chat about is Nightclub. I would have loved to get into that, but that comes out. Is that 2 weeks' time, or has that been delayed?
Actually, the next book that we have out is in about 3 weeks' time. American Jesus. And I just finished the American Jesus television show. The first season just finished shooting about 3 weeks ago. It's been shot over in Mexico. It's going to be awesome. The season 1 is called The Chosen One, and it'll start spring next year. The next book after that is Nightclub, which is out in December, and then Nemesis Reloaded is out in January. Nightclub is awesome, by the way. The very fast thing is, if Spider-Man was a vampire, it's like the idea of a teenage boy bitten by a vampire decides to become a superhero instead of becoming a monster, you know, because and if you think about it, vampires and superheroes, it's kind of similar.
There's a nice
powers. They can, climb up walls. They can teleport, turning into steam, smoke, and everything, you know. But they also have their weaknesses. They've got like their kryptonite is crucifixes, garlic, all that kind of stuff. So weirdly, it actually really works as a superhero thing. And I'm so into it. I've actually finished volume 2 already. It's just done and it's been drawn. And here's the kicker. We're doing it for half price. We're bringing it out for $1.99 instead of $3.99. So it's worth the money at $5.99, but it's only $1.99.
Oh, amazing. Mark, I cannot thank you enough for chatting me. All the way back when I was telling my friends about a comic I read where the Hulk eats Wolverine, and getting to chat with you, it's been an absolute honor. I can't thank you enough. Everyone, before we finish up, you can follow me over on Twitter at Daniel Fee or at Daniel Fee Church or at SamboGizmo1. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And as always, if you have the means, please make sure to donate to the National Adaptation Society. Link for that in the description. Mark, I'll talk to you a little bit off air, but any closing comments, people can go check out American Jesus on Netflix.
That's probably the next thing out. American Jesus, Magic Order will be the next thing shooting after that, but that'll be another year probably before that's on. So, but yes, tons of good stuff. Read more comics. Everybody should be checking out the comics. There's so many TV shows now. I find myself really gravitating towards the comics more. Like I really enjoy reading comics again because there's too much superhero stuff on TV. I'm looking at comics again. That's where the action is.
Oh, totally. Speaking of which, Declan Shelby's Old Dog, everyone is out in comic book stores now. Go pick it up. Issue 1's out. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all in the next video. Bye. Thank you so much.